Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Parallax Abstraction, and welcome to another episode of Retro Flashback, showcasing gaming's roots for a new generation. So today we are taking a look at another launch-era Nintendo Entertainment System title, and you may notice that this bears a little bit of a resemblance to a title I talked about a while ago. If you'll recall, I talked about a game called Vigilante for the TurboGrafx 16, and I kind of didn't like it very much, and I still don't. It's a pretty crappy game, to be honest with you, and this is actually its predecessor. So we are taking a look at Kung Fu, which came out originally in arcades and was ported to just about every platform under the friggin' sun, but we're playing the NES version, which is the one that a lot of people, myself included, remember, and despite sharing a lot of things in common with Vigilante, I actually like this game a lot more, and despite it being very, very similar, and I'm sure that's going to seem really, really strange, but I'm going to attempt to show you why that is. So, let's fire this up here. So, you'll see here that we've got 4 different modes. The only real difference between Game A and Game B is the difficulty. A lot more enemies, tougher enemies, and 2-player isn't as good as it sounds. It's not 2-player simultaneous, it's just alternating, and you're basically just trying to see who can get the better score. So 2-player, not really all that beneficial. So we're going to do Game A, which is easier. I've actually never finished this game because it actually gets pretty difficult even on the beginning mode, but we're going to start it off here. First thing you're going to notice is this. Yes, so 2 things that were pretty impressive to me about this game at the time. Number 1, it actually has voice samples in it. They're incredibly lo-fi, incredibly rudimentary, but nonetheless, it's voice samples on an NES and on a launch NES game, which was pretty damn impressive. Even a lot of later NES games didn't have voice samples in it. And secondly, the soundtrack for this game is one of the most utterly simplistic and yet somehow incredibly memorable funkadelic chiptunes ever. Like, just listen to this. That's basically all it is. The whole song to this game lasts about 15 seconds, and it's just that loop, but I don't know why. It's just got that funky little foot-tapping bass to it, and you're just like, yeah! This is awesome! I don't know why. I really like that. There's actually been at least 1, if not more, OC remix versions of that song, which are just delicious. I absolutely love it. But yeah, so you're seeing the basic gameplay mechanics here. Much like Vigilante, you punch and kick, and there are also jump variants of the punch and the kick, which basically are just doing the same things but in the air, which does become more important later on, as you're going to see. And the game's core mechanic is throwing a buttload of enemies at you, constantly from multiple directions, and occasionally stronger enemies like dudes who throw knives. And in later levels, you're going to see how it gets even crazier. And your goal is very simple. It's to get to the end of the level, take out a boss guy, and the bosses are all very different and all have their own unique strategies. And some of them actually can get pretty tricky. And your goal is actually to rescue your girlfriend in this game. Funny enough, that's not actually shown in the intro, but when you get past the 2nd level, there is a rather hilariously bad cutscene, I guess if you want to call it that, in which it shows you that. So there was the boss for that level. Now I can sit here and keep farming enemies indefinitely if I want for score. This is a good score attack game, but score is not that important. There is a bit of a balance as well, because you get more points for taking out enemies, but you also get bonus points at the end of a level after you hear this, which is a really horrible, like, random boss song or level completion song. And you see you get bonus points for not only your health but the time remaining. So you want to make sure that you get we want to sort of min-max those 2 things. And here right off the bat, you're going to see how this level is crazy different. So there are multiple types of weird falling enemies that happen in the first part of this level. You got these dragons, because why not the hell not dragons, which are very easy to dodge but hard to actually get to in time. But if you can, you get a lot of points for them. There are those little grenade balls that pop down from the ceiling, which you can get with a jump kick, which also give a decent number of points. And there's those snake things, which you can actually hit before they hit the ground. And you can hit them when they're on the ground, but it requires rather precise timing. And then when you get about halfway through the level, you get normal enemies coming at you, and you get these crazy little midget guys, which actually can be really mean. If you let them get too close to you, they'll actually do sort of air rolls at you that can be really tricky to dodge sometimes. And now you see we got a different boss here, which is this guy who has his boomerang. And on this level, he's relatively easy to take out. But it's pretty, you can get screwed up by the timing of that boomerang. So you may be asking yourself, this really doesn't look a hell of a lot better than Vigilante. Why do I like this game and hate that one? Well, it's pretty straightforward, really, which is just that... That's the cutscene. Yeah, I know, it's pretty bad. Mr. X is the guy that you're due to take out in this. Funny enough, the Japanese version of this game was apparently based off of, loosely based in fiction, I guess, if you want to call it that, off of a popular Jackie Chan movie at the time, which is rather interesting. Yeah, they obviously didn't. Jackie Chan wasn't a thing at all in the US at this point, so they didn't retain that for this game. But, I mean, really, the Jackie Chan thing was just a license thing. I mean, this game really has no narrative to speak of. So, the reason I like this game more than Vigilante is a couple of things. Number one, there's better variety. There's more enemy variety. The enemies sort of mix things up a little bit more. And it's going to sound strange given that this is a launch period NES title that uses the system in only its most basic fashion, but I find this game plays better. I think the controls are much tighter. I think the enemies are not nearly as cheap and unfair. I mean, getting through a level without taking a significant amount of damage in Vigilante is almost impossible because the enemies are just, they cheat. They're unfair. Yeah, that's weird, like, elevator tone is to signify that you got an extra life. And this boss does a ton of damage, but if you can get in close to him, you can take him out very, very easily. I actually find he's pretty easy for the third level. Oh, time's running out. Gotta go, gotta go, gotta go, gotta go. There we go. We hit the end. The sound design in this is pretty amazing in some ways and pretty horrible in other ways. But yeah, I find the controls in this game to be much tighter. I find it's much more responsive. I find you're not fighting the core mechanics of the game in addition to the enemies. Yes, these annoying bee things. I think there's more variety in that you get more, and it has more enemy types in general, and you get them. Like, every level's significantly different. You're not just fighting variants on human enemies. You know, you're fighting these weird bee things. You're fighting randomly spawning air dragons, because why not? You're fighting, different kinds of human enemies that have notably different types of attacks. And it's kind of funny, because Vigilante was actually originally supposed to be basically Kung Fu 2. It was supposed to be the follow-up to this game, and it ended up sort of getting rebranded and taking on that sort of human-on-human gangland aesthetic, which I think was a real disservice. I think this game is far more interesting, and despite being more simplistic and not nearly as technically adept or proficient as Vigilante was, it plays substantially better. I really don't... I think Vigilante is a game that feels like it's fighting the player, like it's active, like almost like it actively resents you. And this game is challenging, to be sure, but it never really feels unfair. You can learn the enemies, you can learn their methods and their movements and their patterns, and you can do so without ripping your hair out in the process like you will in Vigilante, because Vigilante, there is a certain element of randomness in that game, where even if you understand an enemy, sometimes, punches and kicks just won't connect, or other things just won't operate the way they're supposed to, and that is really, really frustrating to me and really aggravating. This doesn't play that way. And yeah, I guess in that way it's easier, and it's probably easy to say, oh, you just don't like hard games, and well, I mean, I kind of don't, but and by the way, yes, I'm fighting a monkey, and I'm fighting him by knocking his head off. That's hilarious. And yeah, maybe you could say I'm a wimp for liking easier games, and well, that's fine. But that's the thing. I still find this game challenging. Like I said, I've never beaten it. And the interesting thing is, you see that little dragon counter in the upper right there beside the timer? That actually only increments when you finish the game, and the game actually loops you when you beat it. And apparently if you beat this game 10 times, you actually get some kind of crazy special bonus, which I've never seen. But yeah, it's still challenging, even on the A-type mode. But it just doesn't feel unfair, and it doesn't feel like you're fighting poorly designed mechanics. It just feels like you're playing a really tightly crafted game that is simplistic, but is also just fun in a really dumb, easy to pick up and understand way, which I can really appreciate. Also, I think this has some historical significance. Most people believe that this is actually the first brawler game or beat-em-up game ever created, and I don't know that 100%, but based on the timing of it and what I can remember of games that came before it, I would say there's probably a pretty good chance of that. And it's pretty cool, actually. The gentleman who produced this game, which is, I'm probably going to butcher this, Takashi Nishiyama. I probably did that okay. This wasn't his first game. He actually did Irem's Moon Patrol before it. But this guy has a pretty interesting history. After this, he went on to develop Street Fighter for Capcom. Now, no, I'm talking Street Fighter, the original one that admittedly most people don't remember very fondly, which I should do that game someday, because few people know much about the original Street Fighter. But he went to develop that, and then he went on, get this, he went to take over game development at SNK, and he did, well, he was the guy who created the Neo Geo platform. He's one of the principal architects behind it. I actually haven't done any Neo Geo games on the show yet, though I really want to, because the Neo Geo is an amazing kind of outlier oddity system with an incredible history. And this guy actually went on to design that, and he did a whole bunch of notable games for it, including like some of the Fatal Fury titles. He did Art of Fighting. He did the first Samurai Showdown, which is some people consider one of the finest brawlers ever made, and definitely among the finest Neo Geo games ever made. And this guy did that stuff too. So I mean, the guy who did this went on to do a lot of very notable stuff, and I think for that reason, this game is actually pretty historically significant in that front as well. And yeah, I mean, as brawlers go, funny enough, brawlers are starting to come back a little bit now, but obviously the brawler and beat-em-up sort of genre became much more advanced than this and much more polished and, yeah, in many ways much more interesting. But there is just something really that feels really, really good about the simplicity and the tightness of Kung Fu. And it's a game that, you know, even by NES standards, is pretty rudimentary, and that certainly shows, but there's still something about it that I find really satisfying, that I really enjoy playing. And I played a lot of Vigilante back in the day as well, because it was a game I got with my TurboGrafx, and I kind of didn't want to admit to myself that it was a bad game, and I put way more time into it than I should have, to be honest with you. And this just feels better in almost every way. It's really the same kind of game, but it does everything better than Vigilante. You know, it doesn't look near as good, it doesn't sound as good, though I think this Funkadelic soundtrack is pretty awesome, but it just feels like a better package overall, and it just feels like a more fun game. And, you know, you play video games to be entertained, and if you're playing a game that feels like, you know, the designer is almost making fun of you because of how poorly it plays and how much he must know that you're having to fight its mechanics, then yeah, that's the wrong way to make games. And that's how Vigilante feels, but it's not how this one feels. And I think that's a very key difference. But this was available as well on a billion other things. Like I said, it was an arcade game first. This is how I remember it, but it's been on a million other systems. There's even versions of it for Windows and BOS, if you can believe it. It's been everywhere. So there are a lot of versions out there. I imagine, based on the simplicity of this, I imagine you'll get a similar core experience on most of the platforms it came out on, though your mileage may vary. I can't vouch for those. This is actually the only one I've ever played. I haven't even played the arcade game, which I probably should someday. I'd like to see how that is. But it's really good. You know, it's if you're just looking for something that does a couple of things very, very well, this is a good title. So yeah, that is Vigilante, developed by Irem and published by Nintendo, at least on the NES, in 1985 on the Nintendo Entertainment System. I think it's a good early NES game, and it's very historically important to the beat-em-up genre, and I still think it can hold its own okay at a core level. My name has been Parallax Abstraction. Thank you all very much for watching, and I will see you next time.